Hi, and welcome to today's Developing and Launching Your MVP webinar. If you have come along to one of our previous MVP webinars, welcome back. And if this is your first webinar with us, thanks for joining us again. If you missed our first and second webinars, you can find them online on our YouTube channel, and I've just posted the links in the chat room below. I'm Chloe, I'm reinteractive's community manager, and today James McGrath, our development manager, will be running our webinar, and Mikel, Lindsaar, reinteractive's founder, will be jumping in every now and then to share some examples as well. So James, if you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you, Chloe. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is the third in a series of webinars that we're doing on MVPs. As Chloe has mentioned, you can access the first two on YouTube. The first webinar was titled The What and the Why of the MVP, and in that we explored what an MVP is and why it's a good thing to do. The second one was called Identifying Your MVP's Key Feature Set, and in that we delved into techniques that we could use to cut down your feature set from a huge feature set that would be your ideal product, your wish list, down to the core feature set that for an MVP launch. All right, so some introductions. We're Reinteractive. We're a company of 20-odd software professionals. We're all Australian-based. We're based all around Australia, and we're a fully remote team that is rapidly growing. I'm James McGrath. I'm Development Manager at Reinteractive. I'm responsible for managing Reinteractive's software development teams. And with us is Mikel Lindsaar, who is the founder of Reinteractive. Mikel is also a Ruby on Rails core contributor. He is the maintainer and author of the MailGem, used by millions of people and software products. And a little known fact is that Mikel can speak Japanese. You want to say hello, Mikel?
Thanks, James. Yeah, I didn't really expect to be talking about my Japanese skills today, but
maybe konnichiwa.
Manichi, genki desu ka? There you go. You can all have some Japanese now. Thanks, James. And that was great.
He's very good at ordering Japanese food, I can tell you that. Also, you heard Chloe's voice before. Chloe is our community manager, and you might have met her at our community events, Install Fest and Development Hub. And Chloe has been instrumental in helping to get this organised, so thank you very much, Chloe. Today's format for the webinar is that we are going to be doing a presentation for about 30-odd minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for question and answers. I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking, but Mikel will be chiming in on a frequent basis to share his experiences and thoughts. All right, for those who did not attend the first webinar, the what and the why of a MVP, in that we defined what a MVP is, or a minimum viable product. I'll quickly define that for those who don't know what an MVP is. And we're going to define it as it's the minimum functionality that provides enough value to a subset of your target market that they will make a repeated use of your product. So basically, you're putting in the minimum amount of effort to build the minimum amount of features to build a product that is actually going to be usable by your target market. So we're looking at an MVP definition from the point of view of building a software product. You can go even more basic than that, but for today's seminar, we're going to talk about it in relation to building that first version of your product that you can start to interact with your customers or your users with. So today we're talking about developing and launching your MVP, and we're going to be taking the perspective of a product owner who is employing others to do the building of the software. If you were building the software yourself, obviously your experience is going to be a lot different from employing someone else to do that building for you. So let's start with developing. Developing, it's the build process. It's what we do at the start. And for the start of development, I would encourage you to use a very powerful tool the tool is a wireframing. Now, what is a wireframe? For those who don't know, it's a clickable interactive prototype that you can, it demonstrates how the user interface will hang together and gives you a good feel about how the system is going to work. We've got some examples on our website that Chloe can post a link to in the chat window, and I encourage you to check those out because they're a really great tool for starting the process off. They're really a great way to explore and hone your ideas. Often when we have a product idea, we've got these ideas in our heads, but we're not, and we think we know everything we want to develop, but once we see it in a clickable and interactive version, you can realize that there are some problems with it. A wireframe is great for doing that early exploration because it's a lot quicker than building a software product from scratch, and it allows you to iterate those ideas a lot quicker than building the software in code. They're also a really powerful tool for communicating your intent to your developers. Once you've chosen your developers, you can take that wireframe and present it to the developers, and it's a great way to communicate those ideas that you've got about your product. Much more powerful than having a set of dot points listing the features that you want. And it really comes down to the fact that humans are tactile creatures and visual creatures. They're going to learn the ability to interact with those wireframes is going to be a lot more meaningful to those people than just listing out those features in a big list. They're also great because you can take them out to show potential customers. You can get a lot of feedback from your customers on your wireframes. We've got a client at the moment who we've built a wireframe for, and they've taken it to their customers and they've learned quite a few new things about where their product should be going just from that wireframe, and spotted some important issues with the product before the development process started. You could even say that a wireframe is an MVP in itself, and you could present that to your customers and say, look, if I build the software product that this represents, would you be willing to buy it? And if they're giving you positive feedback, then that gives you a lot of confidence that you're going in the right direction. You could even ask them to cut your check on the spot and to show them how confident you are. All right, so another thing to consider when building your software is to consider web before native.
Actually, James, I might just jump in on the wireframe thing if you don't mind. The other point about the wireframes is, of course, that the example we've shown there is actually quite a high fidelity wireframe in that it's got a lot of features in it and a lot of detail. You don't have to produce a wireframe to that level of detail. You can actually produce it, much less. For example, if you're first starting out on a web app, quite often what we do with a client is our UX person will sit down and draw the wireframe out just with really thick paper and black markers. And actually, Ed just asked a question about what are the best tools to use for doing this, right? And this is actually it's exactly the question that I'm just answering. So when the UX person jumps in, they're going to first do a wireframe. You just grab a big piece of paper, like a bunch of A4 sheets of paper, and get a really thick black marker, like 5 mil, half a centimeter thick marker, one of the really thick ones, and draw it out with that. And the reason you want to do the very first version with that, when you're just working it out with friends or you're trying to work it out with business partners, is that having a really thick marker stops you getting into the detail of it and stops you fussing about, should the login box be 3 millimeters from the right border or 2 millimeters? Or what's the exact text that I should put in this box for the intro? And we can do a webinar later about the wireframing process and the UX process, and we'll do that with our UX expert at some point in the next few weeks or months. But starting off with that really rough draft, and then take that concept, once you've got the basic flow, you've worked out 5 or 6 pages of your wireframe, you can take that to someone like a digital agency. It could be us, it could be someone else. And a lot of those digital agencies offer a wireframing service where they'll take that initial draft from you and maybe spend 2 or 3 weeks with you building up a medium fidelity wireframe like what you see here with the Flood.io, which we did for them as a customer, and build it out into a clickable interface. Now that tool that's on the screen right there, that's actually a program called Axure, A-X-U-R-E, I think. Chloe will find the link from Ildiko and post it in the chat room shortly. But there are other tools like Balsamic, Mockingbird, a whole bunch of tools like this that you can use. But I think if you're not a wireframing expert, like if you're not trained in it, the best tool for you would be just simply grabbing a piece of paper with a really thick blackboard marker and just start, drawing it out so that you've got some basic A4 screens to build it on. And once you've done that, then take that concept to somebody and get them to start polishing up or give you feedback on the UX and how the user experience is going to roll. You don't want to try going for a really high fidelity wireframe right at the start because you're going to get bogged down in all the little details. What you see there on the screen with Flood.io was probably after about 2 weeks of work, we finally came to that concept. But there was a lot of piece of paper being thrown around before then. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Ed.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. That raises another point that is worthwhile mentioning. With the wireframing, because it's a really quick process. When you're doing it, it's really easy to put in lots of flourishes and nice to have features. And during the MVP process, just keep in mind that it's important to identify those nice to haves versus those essential components, because you don't want to stray off that path of the MVP too far with your wireframe. All right, so it's good to consider going web before native. We can build a lot of software these days in web browsers that you couldn't do in the early days of the web. Modern web browsers are really very powerful tools, and you can achieve a lot of what used to only be achievable using native applications, native being either desktop applications or mobile apps that are downloaded from the App Store. There are lots of benefits from going the mobile version first. Firstly, you don't have any need for users to install anything. They can access the system through a web browser, which makes for a lot less friction when you're trying to onboard those new users and testers. You don't need to have that overhead of supporting multiple versions. Think about how much effort Microsoft has to go through to support all the different versions of Windows. If they could have everybody using the exact same version of Windows, they would have a huge support burden lifted off them. But as it stands, their software is cannot be all updated at once, so it is going. They have that support burden. If you're using web software, you can deploy those new features for users all at the same time, and that allows you to have a cohesive experience for your users. They're cross-platform. You're going to be able to use, if you're targeting users of the web, they can access it from their Macintosh computer. They can use Windows. They can use iPhone or Android. You can get a huge amount of users just by going web only. If you go for a native platform, you're going to have to build an app for all those different platforms, which is a very time-consuming and expensive exercise, especially when you're starting out and you haven't quite honed the idea of your product. You haven't had that first version released, and so you're still learning about what that product should be. It's also great for an MVP because you're going to be able to see, monitor your users a lot more easily than using a native app. You can access your database and see what they're up to and how they're using those features, which is a really powerful tool for learning about users and working out how to proceed with future development. Piracy is not really an issue when you've got web-based software, because everything's running on a server, so people cannot pirate your software. And they're great from a recurring revenue point of view, so that really helps to smooth out that cash flow that can be quite difficult with a native software, where you'd sell it for a big fee up front and then have that support burden for the lifetime of that software. And let's face it as well, you're going to have to build, if you wanting to build a mobile version of your software, you're probably going to need to have a web version anyway for people who aren't willing to install your software. So you're going to need to do it anyway. All right, during the software development process, you've got to be prepared to be heavily involved in software development. It's not a black box. You can't just throw the specs over a wall at the developers and expect to get the product that you want out at the other end. You know, as the product owner, you're going to know that product vision better than anyone else, and to make sure the developers are moving towards that correct vision, you're going to need to be communicating with them all the time. And the best way to be doing that is to be heavily involved and communicating with it on a daily basis, if not even more than just once a day, multiple times a day. You really need to be highly available to answer any questions that the developers have, because without that guidance, the developers are either going to get stalled, which causes delays in production, which is expensive, or they're going to be making possibly wrong guesses on which way you want the feature to work. So it's important to be highly available to answer those questions as they come in. And you're going to need to review features really regularly. You want to give feedback immediately to the developers so that they can make changes to the product as those changes are needed, whilst those features are fresh in their mind. At Reinteractive, we're in constant communication with our clients, and there's a lot of great tools that can be used to communicate. We use instant messaging like FlowDoc. We're using Skype all the time, Pivotal Tracker for tracking progress and communicating scope of the project, telephone, you name it. But we make use of those tools because we recognize how important it is to keep in constant communication with the product owner. All right, and just on that idea of the product owner, it is really important that the product owner is identified correctly. That person needs to be a person who... Oh, go on, Michael.
Yeah, I might just jump in on that one. James was about to say that person needs to be the person that, you know, makes the decisions or can empower and, you know, make the right choices. This one slide, out of all the slides and all the things we do at Reinteractive, is probably the most important thing to ensure a product success. If you're the product owner, i.e. you're the one who is in charge of the product, you've got the knowledge of the problem that you're trying to solve, you understand the idiosyncrasies of what you're trying to handle, you're the one that's spoken to the clients, you know, if you're that person and you're not involved in the development process, you're not going to get the product you want. And we've seen this a few times. I was going to say we see it time and time again, but we really try hard to not ever see it. Because if it doesn't build out properly, then, you know, the clients aren't getting what they want. So when you engage with Reinteractive, for example, we actually say at the start, you know, a requirement is that the product owner comes to the daily sprint meetings and the weekly stand-ups, and it's actually, as I said, I mean, it's the most important part of this whole process. You can screw up the wireframes, you can miss a feature in your product build, you can build the wrong feature first, but if the product owner is not engaged, if the product owner is engaged, then you'll catch that and you'll get it done. And you'll be able to fix it rapidly because the product owner's there. Say the product owner's there on Monday, we're delivering a feature, we tell him about it or her about it, she looks at it and goes, yeah, but we actually need it a little bit like this because I just spoke to this user last week and they're after that. And the developer right then and there can go, oh, okay, cool, we know how to fix that. And the next day it can be fixed and done, right? Or we had an example with a client where we were building a feature and they had sort of like a consultant helping on the development of the project. And the consultant actually gave us, you know, not the wrong thing to do, but slightly the wrong thing to do. And we went ahead and built that, thinking that that was what the consultant and the product owner wanted, because we assumed that they were in tight communication. The product owner then came in, you know, a week later, looked at it and went, that won't work. And then we had to redo that work, right? So that's an example where it went wrong for us. And then, you know, we've made sure it got working and we fixed it up and we spoke to them. and cleaning that up. But that's where this product owner being involved on a daily basis would have just short-circuited that whole cycle, and it really is probably the most important thing. Thanks, James.
Cool, thank you, Michael. All right, so part of this process is that you are wanting to take delivery of that software on a regular basis. You want to get it early in the process and often, and that's going to allow you to give feedback to the devs and give rapid feedback to the devs as the software is developing. It's much easier for the developer to make the changes whilst the feature is fresh in their mind than to wait until the end of the project. And also allows you to pick up, as Michael was saying, where if the project is going away from the dream of the software, or ideas have changed and the developers don't know about that, you're going to pick up on that much quicker if you're taking regular delivery of software. Some software developers will say, they'll start building the software and go off and then drop it back in your lap at the end. That's not the right way to go in my mind. It's important to insist on that you take regular delivery of that software. And it's important to, when you're taking delivery of that software, it's really important to try, when you're using and testing that software and testing the new features, you try to use that software as the way it's intended. Try to solve that problem that you're building. Use the software to solve the problem that it was designed for. And a simple example might be if you're building a blog software, try writing a blog. And use that software to write the blog and see where the software is failing for you. Don't just test each component individually. Try to test it end to end. Part of getting regular software deliveries, especially this really applies mostly to web-based software, is to have a staging environment. Insist on having access to that staging environment really early. Staging environment, also known as user acceptance testing environment, and in web software, it's a server that the developers can deploy changes to, but they're not going live into your production environment where everyone else, all the end users can see it. It's a staging place to test things, interact with the software in a realistic way, but not to go for the next step of deploying to production. And a staging environment can be really useful for providing access to alpha users for feedback, which is an important part of the process. Really important to start to work with your users closely. It's important during the build process. It's not just once you've released, but you want to be working with your users constantly. And to do this effectively, it's really good to identify one or two people or organizations to launch to or to build with, and the way that you choose them, you want them to have certain characteristics. You want them to be willing and able to communicate with you. They're really happy to communicate. They have a real need for the product you're developing, or they love the idea. And really importantly is that they're representative of a larger group. So things that you can learn from that one or two users can extrapolate to a larger set of users. So you can learn and build something that is going to be useful for a lot more people. So it's important to work closely with those users. You listen to their feedback and their ideas, but at the same time, you need to be careful. You need to look at the motivation behind their feedback and ideas. You think about, instead of thinking about what the feature is that they're requesting, you think about why they are requesting it, and you think about how you might want to solve that issue for the user. They might have thought of a solution for themselves, but you might be able to think of a better solution. An example might be that they request to have, maybe it's an order processing system and they want to get an alert when an order hits a status after a certain number of days. Why? You could ask them, why do you want that alert? And really, if you drill down into it, maybe they're going to tell you that if an order is unpaid after 10 days, then the user, the person who made the order, should be contacted. And perhaps the solution is not to alert. A better solution might not be to alert the super user of the system, but maybe you should be sending an automatic email out to users who haven't paid their contracts. Maybe that's a much better solution. So if you drill down into the motivation and look at the why they instead of the what, you can build a better product. Also, you want to be careful. You are building to the general case. If you've got a particular user, they're going to have particular needs, and although they might represent a larger group, they might try to develop the software so it is perfect for them, but you want to make that your software. You've got to be careful not to build a software that is only usable by one particular type of, one particular user. So things like drop-down values. If you are wanting to target certain groups of users, you don't want to make those drop-downs specific to a particular user. Otherwise, you're going to paint yourself into a corner and develop the wrong features. So yeah, work closely with those users, but take their feedback and input with a grain of salt. It's important to get those users engaged because you need them engaged to go through this process with you, because to be honest, it's not necessarily on the outset, it could be a really boring process helping someone to build their software. So you need to engage with these users, and one of the ways to get them engaged is to make them feel special. You've selected these users because they are you've identified them specially as your build users. So tell them that. You tell them that you've specially selected them and that to help them feel special. You tell them that their feedback is valued and that you are acting on their feedback. So once you get feedback from them, you can then go back and plan your features, and you can tell them how that feedback is influencing the product development. A lot of people would be excited to hear that they have real meaningful impact on the vision and development of a new product, and that can make them feel special and engaged. You can also offer them discounts and offers. So an example might be 50% off for the first 6 months of them using the software once it goes live, and that will help them motivate them to keep working with you on that, during that development process. Importantly, whilst you're building, you want to keep your marketing machine rolling. So keep gathering that list of your potential customers for launch. You should have worked out your value proposition at this point, and you want to keep building that list, because once you come to launch, you want to have a list of customers. You don't want to finish your software development and then suddenly I'm ready for launch and you don't have anybody to launch to. Ways to build your list. There's lots and lots of different ways, and these are just a few that I like. You can blog about things that are interesting to your target market and put a newsletter sign-up form on your blog. You could buy an email list from your industry association. You could collect business cards when you go to relevant meetups. You could advertise on Google AdWords and create a landing page when people land on your page interested in what the mythical product that you're advertising. You could form partnerships with the people in the similar industry that you're targeting. There are lots of different ways, and it's just important. It's an important process to make sure that you've built that list and you are ready for your big launch day. Which brings us to the second part of the webinar, which is launching. All right, there's a couple of ways to launch, a couple of main ways to launch your product, and these are soft launching versus hard launching. Now, a hard launch is your traditional launch where you try to do it in a big bang. You try to create as much media interest and fanfare as possible. So you put out press releases, you send out a launch email to everybody you can think of and encourage them to use the product, and there's a huge flurry of activity. And this is contrasted against the soft launch approach, which is where you launch small and quietly, and you carefully select a limited number of users to launch to, and then after you do one launch, you can then follow up with a second launch and a third launch. And so you're launching in waves and not all at once. And my preference, if you can't guess already, is to launch with a soft launch. And there are lots of really great reasons to launch with a soft launch instead of going with that big bang hard launch. For instance, it's much easier to scale slowly as you bring those. If you're bringing your users on slowly, it's much easier to scale than if you try to bring on hundreds or thousands of users at the one time. And I'm not talking just software, although that is a big part of it. Your software is going to have bottlenecks that you might not have noticed, but it's also about scaling your backend, your processes in your business. You might not be able to support 1,000 users who are needing that a lot of attention, because when you first launch your product, it's going to be the roughest it is ever going to be. You're going to add more polish to it as you go along, but at the very first outset, it's going to be quite rough, and those early users are going to need more attention from you to smooth over those rough edges, to help them get past those roadblocks that your early version of your software throws up. Soft launch is great because you can learn from your previous efforts. As I mentioned, with a soft launch, you can launch in waves. If you launch your first wave, and you might learn some key things that you can build into your second wave that will make the second wave a lot more effective than the first wave. You can test your messaging. You could send out certain messaging to one group of users versus the other and see which is more effective before you go and send out to a larger list. And it's an important concept because you don't want to burn through your whole list when you know the least. You've got the least amount of information. If you do that hard launch when you haven't got and that's when you're most ignorant about the whole process, and you've used your whole list, you are in a hole. But if you can learn from those initial launches, then you are going to you will make your list go a lot further than just if you approach it with that big bang approach. And the nice thing about a soft launch is you can always launch big after that soft launch. It's you can launch with a few waves, and then once you feel like you've really honed that product offering, then you can do your big launch and try to attract as many users as possible, so you can get the best of both worlds.
On the next slide, on this one, choosing your launch customers carefully. I might just do this slide, James. The thing that he was talking about there with the soft launch, it's one of the major points, again, in releasing a successful product. You'll see a lot of the really popular and powerful SaaS applications worldwide actually do this. You'll find some of the online SaaS products will get a feature that's been requested by some key users, then they'll select those users to release it to, offer to them as like their special beta or advanced users, test that feature out a bit on those beta users, and then release it more broadly. I know that Xero does this, for example. Flood.io does this. One of our other customers that Xero is not a customer, but one of our customers, Flood.io, they had a product which does load testing. And they do, website load testing. And we had some different types of requirements that came in for different users, and we had power users come in and ask for specific products. So what happened there was develop up a list of features for them, release it to them, get feedback from them, and then make sure that it worked, and then we could release it to the whole client base. But by that point, we'd shaken all the bugs out of it, and you'll find that your power users or your beta users are much more resilient to being, given some broken software, as long as they feel like they're getting some exchange for it, which is getting advanced features. And that's what this slide's all about, choosing your launch users carefully. You want to find launch users that have an understanding about your product, can provide some feedback, definitely have the problem that you're specifically trying to solve, not a related problem that it might solve. Ideally, they've got some technical nous, so they know that if the page is still spinning, it's probably some JavaScript error or something, and they can report that and give you some feedback. And also ones that are actually willing to pay for the product, so that you can say to them, look, this is how much it costs, but you can be part of the advanced team and you can get more features sooner. But we really want your feedback as well. If you can find a bunch of those users, you're really in clover, especially if some of them are thought leaders, because they'll then go out and tell other people how awesome you are. So yeah, I think we can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Michael. All right, so during this whole process, it's really important to keep communicating with your users because you want to be getting their valuable feedback. To do this, you need to be clear, give clear instructions to those users on how they're going to be able to communicate with you and provide tools and mechanisms for them to communicate with you. The aim, of course, is to find out where the product can be improved and what is important for the next iteration of your build. You want them to be giving you feature requests and bug fixes and all sorts of things. So you want to get that communication up really high so that you are getting the most out of those early users. And you really need to be very responsive to these users. They're very valuable, and you don't want to get an email from these users and let it sit in your inbox for a week before responding to them. You want to be responsive and show how much you value their contribution. A great way to do this is when you release new features and inform your users about it, you could say thank you to a particular user, and that will make them feel special and engaged. And there's a lot of great tools out there for communicating with the users, where there's a huge amount of wonderful tools. There's feedback widgets that you can put on your website with little questions or forms to give feedback about certain things. There's instant messaging widgets where you can communicate directly with the users as they're using the software on the website itself. You could send email surveys. There's great survey tools out there, and to get feedback in that way. There's help desk software, which is an example, which is Zendesk, a very powerful tools for logging support requests and feature requests. And you could even buy them lunch if you've got a good relationship with some of these users, which I hope you do. You can take them out to lunch and pick their brains whilst they're eating. It's also important, you're going to be communicating with the users, but you want to be monitoring your users as well, because you want to learn from how they're using that software. Often users will talk about how they're using the software, but they might not necessarily have a real understanding of the reality of their use of the software. And sometimes it's better just to watch them from a distance and try not to interfere with what they're doing. And there are lots of tools for doing this. But things you want to start asking yourself some questions at this point. You'll have a number of questions that you want to answer about your users, and if you can note down these questions, and then you can start to think about how you can get answers to those questions. Questions might be what features are being used a lot, maybe what features aren't being used. You might have added some features that nobody wants. Maybe there is confusing features in your product, or there could be some part of the process where users are getting blocked and halting and not completing things. And this can really, if you find some good questions to ask, it will reveal a lot of information about your users and how they're using the product. And this is a good place to involve your development team. They are going to be able to give you ideas on what sort of information they can glean, and if you need a particular piece of information, they can give you ideas on how you can get a hold of that information. They might be able to get the information themselves, or they might have to implement a solution for getting that information. But it's important to involve your development team in those questions. There are a lot of great tools for monitoring your users. Google Analytics is a very well-known tool. More appropriate for applications, web applications, is Kissmetrics and Mixpanel. These are really great tools for monitoring the use of your applications on a per user basis, and you can get a lot of insights using these tools smartly. But you don't even need to use these tools. You can just poke around your database to find out how your users are using the system. A question might be how many comments have been made by a particular user, who's uploading the most photos, or who is not uploading photos, who's recently logged in, who is using the software and who isn't using the software. There's so many different questions that you could ask, and that information can be gleaned out of the database by a smart dev. All right, and the whole point of this monitoring and communication is to learn. You want to learn lessons about how things are being used and what needs to change in your software. And this learning is going to guide your next set of development, because let's face it, it'd be nice to think we can get that software product perfect when we first release it, but in reality we're going to make a few mistakes. We're going to be missing a few features that we didn't think were important. We will might have to change our ideas about certain things. We're going to learn a lot when we first get in contact with these users, and as we learn, we can plan out that next iteration. And software development, it's a continuous process. You could almost say the software is never finished. There's always something to be done. So using that feedback and those lessons, you can plan what changes are needed to the software and then start producing those changes and delivering them. And then that takes us full circle. All right, so that concludes this webinar. What's next? That's a good question. We're going to iterate on these webinars. We've learnt a few things from doing these series, and we're going to incorporate that feedback and make the webinars even better. And we are going to rerun the webinars from scratch. So if you didn't make it to the first webinars, I encourage you to join us at them in the near future. Chloe will be sending out an email at the end of this webinar, and it will have a link in it where you can provide feedback on the webinar, and it'll be really wonderful to get positive and negative feedback, because we really want to improve these and make these webinars a valuable resource for people. So your feedback would be very welcome. All right, so we've come to...
Is there any questions?
Questions, yes.
Questions.
We've had a couple of questions during the presentation.
Yep, we've had one or two, and I've answered one of them. And thank you very much for attending. Obviously, we've covered a lot in that, and we will put this whole seminar up on our video channel, and Chloe will email that out to everyone to make sure that you can skim through it and see different parts again. But yeah, are there any other questions about what we went over, choosing your MVP, choosing your customers, wireframing, being a product owner, anything like that? Fire them away. If not, that's fine. We have answered some during the seminar. And of course, you can always email in a question to us at any time. We're happy to impart knowledge back on this sort of thing. And if you are running a software development project, even if it's not in Rails, and you have a question, feel free to send us a question. You can fire that off to Chloe if you can't find the right person to email, and we will give you at least a little bit of directional guidance to make sure you get things done. So Ed said, thank you, great stuff, enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Ed. Thanks for being here and asking those questions. And yeah, all right, is there any others? We'll wait another few seconds. If not, awesome. All right, well, thank you very much for attending. It was our pleasure to deliver this to you, and we'll be starting this series again fairly soon to go over it. And we too are iterating over the lessons learned from this MVP, including your feedback, and getting the product out. So thank you very much.